Okay. Yeah, people are starting to filter in. Welcome, those of you who are joining us. We're just going to get started in just a couple minutes. Usually right about this point, either my neighbor starts mowing his lawn or the internet goes out, one or the other. Welcome, those of you who are joining us. We're just going to wait another minute or so. I see lots of people dialing in. We'll just start up in a few seconds. And Nick, can you put the slides up? So we got our first slide there. There we go. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I'm Matt Leighninger. I'm the Vice President for Public Engagement at Public Agenda. Welcome to the webinar today. We're going to be talking about navigating open meetings laws during COVID-19. This webinar is hosted by Public Agenda and supported by our friends at ICMA, the International City County Management Association. Our panelists today, if we get to the next slide here. There we go. Oh, one too many. One back. There we go. I'm Matt Leighninger. I work at Public Agenda. I run the public engagement side of our work. Public Agenda is a nonprofit based in New York City, founded in 1974. We've been around for a long time. Our focus has been throughout that time on the kind of strengthening the relationship between citizens and government. We do this through research, through lots of public opinion research and other sorts of research, and also on the engagement side, where we're trying to help local governments and other kinds of institutions work more productively with their citizens. Let me have our other two panelists introduce themselves. Lisa?
I'm Lisa Amsler, formerly Lisa Bingham. I'm a lawyer by training. I'm a distinguished professor at the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs. And in my law practice for a decade before I became an academic, I worked with municipalities representing school boards and city councils in negotiation with police, firefighters, teachers, and so forth.
Jim?
I'm Jim Malloy. I'm the town manager of Lexington, Massachusetts, and I am also the president-elect of ICMA.
Thank you both for joining us today. We were also supposed to be joined by Abhi Namani, who is a former chief data officer at the city of Los Angeles and former chief innovation officer at the city of Sacramento. He is not feeling well, so he was not able to be part of the session today. I will be trying to pitch in and describe some of the things that he was going to be talking about in terms of online formats and tools for engagement. So I'll do my best there, but we will try to kind of loop in more of his expertise as we go. Can we go to the next slide? Just a few housekeeping things here. So please use the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen, to ask questions. You can start anytime you want. You can start typing in questions now. We will get to those when we've gone through the slides. All of us will do our presentations, and then we'll look and see what kinds of questions we've got in the box. And you can also use the chat function, either to talk with all the participants or individual panelists or people using that chat button at the bottom. Keep in mind, we are recording this webinar, and that includes recording the chat. Zoom actually records everything. So make sure whatever you put in the Q&A or the chat are things that you wouldn't mind other people seeing after the fact. If we can go on to the next slide. So let me just kind of set the stage here a little bit with a little bit of an intro about what is engagement. And I just want to be clear that when we talk about engagement in this webinar, we're using a pretty broad definition. We're talking about all kinds of things, including the circulation of information in communities, gathering input from citizens and residents, discussing and connecting around various issues and priorities in the community, providing choices to people so that they can weigh in on what they want to see happen, what kinds of policies they would like to see. It includes deliberation and certainly includes volunteering and public work. In other words, people taking action themselves to help solve problems, not all just about government solving the problem. So engagement, if we can go to the next slide, engagement is about both the kind of the relationship between people and the institutions in their communities, local governments, school systems, police departments, all kinds of things. And it's also, though, about the relationship among people in the community. That's the next slide. So and engagement at both of those levels is really important. I know we're going to be focused more on the first level today, but engagement, the more you have engagement going on in productive ways among different people in the community, the better off your community is generally going to be in terms of its physical health, public safety, economic development, all kinds of indicators. So we go to the next one. That was that was the one about the relationships and kind of the social networks and social capital. So, okay, so looking at kind of categories of engagement, we've got several kinds here. First of all, conventional engagement, kind of, which is the type that is most often, most prevalent in most places for the last 75 years ago. I'll talk a little bit about that and what it looks like. You all, I'm sure, know quite well what it looks like. Then there's two kinds of engagement which have become more evident, more common in the last 20 years or so, partly because of the limitations of conventional engagement that we'll be talking about. And one is thick engagement, which means small groups, means getting people together in various ways in small group discussions to talk about, you know, the issue, how it matters to them, to look at some information or data on the issue, to kind of think about different choices or recommendations they want to make, ways they might want to take action themselves. So that's thick engagement. It's generally about small groups. Thin engagement is generally about individuals. It's ways for people to engage that are generally faster, easier, often online, not necessarily, but certainly many ways to engage in thin ways online. And they're really full of choices for individuals to make rather than small groups. Thick and thin are both good for different reasons. Thick generally is harder, more time intensive or resource intensive to organize. Thin engagement is generally a lot easier, much more scalable, but it often has kind of, the benefits of it are not usually as deep as with thick forms of engagement for either for the participants or officials. We go to the next slide, we've got kind of a picture of, a very familiar picture, I'm sure to most people, of conventional engagement. You know, conventional engagement is kind of your 3 minutes at a microphone sort of engagement. It is very regimented. Generally, you've got, you know, even the layout of the room kind of reinforces kind of an adult-child paradigm between government and citizens, where the officials or staff, I mean, those are the people with name tags and microphones and comfortable chairs, and everyone else has maybe 1 or 2 microphones and less comfortable chairs. And sometimes just the way this the kind of format of conventional engagement works simply makes people angry. If we look at the next slide, and it's a way, and some of the kind of the concern about changing the laws or the updating the laws on public engagement comes out of people's frustrations with that kind of 3 minutes at a microphone form of participation. That it's something that tends to frustrate officials, tends to frustrate staff, and frustrates the residents as well. It's oriented toward transparency. That's its primary value. This is the primary reason those types of formats were created 50, 75 years ago. But they were created with a kind of a mid-20th century image of how transparency could work. And in fact, all kinds of ways we can be transparent in our decision making and our discussion today that don't really fit in that kind of conventional form of engagement. So if we can go to the next slide, I think we're going over to you, Lisa, and to talk about kind of your work and your research and your experiences both as a practitioner and as a researcher.
Great, wonderful. All of you out there, I'm sorry about the not quite sorry about the picture behind me. It's produced by Praxiteles. He's the messenger of the gods. It's all about communication, and this is about the legal framework for communication, basically between people and their government. So next slide. This is an effort to illustrate where people can interact with government along the policy continuum. So we've got our 3 branches of government. The legislative and quasi-legislative work is upstream when we start identifying problems and thinking about possible solutions and thinking about statutes, moving on to things that are written policies statements. Then midstream, we're looking at the executive branch and public management and implementing the policy in different ways. Downstream, we're enforcing the policy, and we're in the judicial branch primarily, but you can think of this continuum as entirely related to stuff that happens within an executive branch. And if you look at the little arrow lines below, you can see that we've got all these different forms of voice that we can exercise with respect to government. And what we're focusing on today is public engagement, deliberative democracy, the upstream legislative or quasi-legislative work. And I think we're focusing a lot on local government. Next slide. So in terms of the legal framework, we've got, of course, the federal government, and we've got 50 different state governments, but they have roughly the same structure, although not exactly the same language in comparable statutes. So this is just a map of that same policy continuum, looking at the executive branch in the federal government and just identifying a little bit of the mismatch between what's in the law, what's in practice. And so there's our same stream on the top half of the slide. And then underneath, you can see arrows that are illustrating roughly where different statutes seem to kick in. So the in terms of public engagement, it's not like there's a specific statute about public engagement. That's why there's the big red gap stop sign thing. We do have reference to notice and comment for rulemaking in the Administrative Procedure Act. We've got transparency rules in the Freedom of Information Act. We've got transparency of open meetings. It's an open door or sunshine law. But the Sunshine Law does not mandate public participation. Then we've got these interesting statutes that the federal government passed and many states have adopted at the state level that give people a voice. The Negotiated Rulemaking Act, the Administrative Dispute Resolution Act. They give primarily stakeholder voice as opposed to the diffuse public. And then we've got the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and there are, again, similar statutes at the state level. All of these statutes, when you get to the state level, they primarily apply to state agencies, except for the Sunshine Law, the Freedom of Information Acts that will apply to local government. But the Negotiated Rulemaking Act, equivalent in about 25 states, Administrative Dispute Resolution Act, only a few states have something that's really as comprehensive as our federal government. And then there is advisory committee stuff, again, mostly applying to state agencies. And then at the very bottom of the screen, this public participation statutes, pay attention. This is very interesting because they're scattered in different places throughout the US code and throughout state codes. So let's go to the next slide. So the state legal framework is analogous to the federal, primarily focused in terms of those statutes on state agencies. And then you've got local government, which is a creature of state law, and it only has the powers that are given to it, which didn't used to be that much, but in the modern era includes something called the Home Rule Act. And these are broader powers. The idea is to think of a municipality like a person. It's got the same kinds of powers to enter into contracts. All of that is great, but the Home Rule Act is generally silent on the question of public engagement and doesn't contain express mandates. It doesn't prohibit public engagement, but it doesn't say anything. And when a law is silent, I was an outhouse lawyer. I was in a law firm that represented municipalities from the outside. Then there are the in-house lawyers, the ones who are corporation counsel or city attorney. The incentive structures for those two folks are different. Mine used to be, my client wants to do something, I have to figure out how to make it happen. An in-house lawyer has to worry about not getting their client in trouble. So they're avoiding risk. All right, next slide. So, so Matt and I, for a decade, or about a decade, have been part of a diffuse group of stakeholders that have been trying to work on this question of broadening the legal authority for public participation, which resulted in a white paper you can find freely downloadable on the National Civic League website called Making Public Participation Legal. And in it, you will find some brief chapters or pieces by a variety of different people on public participation, on local model kinds of policies for municipalities to adopt, ordinances, a possible state statutory amendment, and other information on the issue. Basically, we're looking at this question of how to broaden legal authority, and because we've got this problem with the state Administrative Procedure Acts being silent, except for notice and comment and rulemaking, and we've got these sunshine laws that require public notice, and depending on the state, may require an agenda. Indiana doesn't require you to use an agenda, but you can use an agenda. Meanwhile, Arizona, we learned the hard way from somebody who is Yuma's city attorney and president of the International Municipal Lawyers Association. It's actually a crime for anybody in the city council to talk about anything not on the agenda under their sunshine law. So a lot of wide-ranging differences. So what we were suggesting, among other things, is amending sunshine laws so that we could broaden the agenda, change the limits, have something maybe called a public participation meeting in there where elected officials could interact informally in a deliberative fashion with members of the public. And that would open up the door to creative thinking. Next slide, please. So the provisions in the proposed statute to amend a state Sunshine Act would mandate agency policies, public participation specialists. One of the problems we have is that I teach in the #1 ranked School of Public Affairs, Public and Environmental Affairs. All right, yes, we're tied with the Maxwell School at Syracuse. They're also #1. But we don't teach courses, with the exception of my husband around the corner in the undergraduate program. We don't teach courses on public participation. I incorporate like a week of it into my negotiation dispute resolution survey course, but this is a problem. So you have people who may be trained to be in public affairs, but they're not necessarily trained to and don't have the expertise that, for example, Matt has or Jim has acquired in public engagement. So this question of, can we have specialists? It can be just somebody who's already there detailed to learn about this stuff in an agency and a policy, and protect the decisions that agencies and organizations make from judicial review, and authorize these broader public participation meetings, and authorize them to think about all the online experimentation we're doing that Jim's going to talk about, and similarly have a local ordinance. Next slide. So Indiana, just to give you some examples from one state, for state agencies, the APA on rulemaking has some great language, but it only applies to state agencies, not local government. So yes, soliciting comments from all or any segment of the public on the need for the rule, drafting or other subject matter, and then also authorization to hold conferences, inviting written suggestions, facts, arguments, or views. This is nice, but technically it doesn't apply to local government. There's also something that is in most state Administrative Procedure Acts are modeled on the Model Administrative Procedure Act adopted by the Uniform Law Commission. And it's got language in there that says that agencies can adopt rules to supplement their procedures. So they could actually broaden their own rules about public engagement. Again, local government in Indiana isn't covered by the state APA, but it could use it as persuasive authority. Let's go to the next slide. So the Indiana open door law is, it doesn't have the criminal provision in it that Arizona's had, but it doesn't require that there be any kind of public participation, including 3 minutes and a microphone, which is the common sort of thin participation that Matt mentioned. It does require 48 hours of notice, but it doesn't require or mandate agendas. Although if you have one, you have to post it outside the meeting before the meeting begins. Next slide. I'm talking fast. That's because I went to junior high and high school in New York. We can talk really quickly. Okay, so in terms of what's happening during COVID-19 with the open door law, our governor, Indiana is doing pretty well, by the way, in terms of COVID-19, although there's no guarantee that will last. The governor has adopted an executive order that essentially waives the open door law rules and authorizes local government to hold public meetings via phone, Zoom, video conference, and the meetings must still be open to the public and the media, but online access is enough. And then again, there's posting notices online instead of the usual paper notice. Next slide, and I think this is my last slide. Okay. Now, remember when I said pay attention to that small language in the corner of the image of the Policy Continuum and public engagement statutes? Well, there are some really interesting things that many or most states may have. There's language about community action agencies. Wherever there are these grant programs from the federal government, states have adopted language required by the federal government in order to qualify for the grants. Community action agencies are very cool, adopted during the War on Poverty in the 60s, and they mandate certain kinds of public engagement. And so look in your own state for this, because they are broad. It's not just health, but it involves any issue related to poverty and low income. And we now know that we have many more people in low income categories nationwide than we had 20 years ago. And so this is an opportunity to use and activate your community action agencies broadly to facilitate working with governments, with interlocal agreements, cooperation agreements with local governments to do public engagement. Related statutes can have requirements that neighborhood-based organizations include people, residents of the area served, members of the groups that they participate in planning. There can be special purpose statutes that require forums and public engagement. For example, in Indiana on women's health, there's an office on women's health that does that. And then there can be special programs that require public comment and public hearing. And for example, our syringe exchange statute has that. So these are just a few examples, thanks to Cassandra Thompson, my research assistant, for pulling them out. And I'm done.
Thanks, Lisa. Jim.
Okay, if we could forward it, great. So I'm going to first start off and assume that not everybody's from Massachusetts and understands the town meeting form of government. So I'll give a 1-minute explanation. So town meeting is the legislative body for municipal governments in Massachusetts, with the exception for town governments. For city governments, they typically have a city council. The town meeting as a legislative body can either be an open town meeting where any registered voter of the town is allowed to come out and vote and speak, or a representative town meeting where people are elected by precinct and you have a number of people who represent the larger group. And so Lexington is a representative town meeting. We have 9 precincts with 20 elected representatives from each precinct. And then we have 18 other people who, by virtue of whatever elected position they have, whether they're on the select board or they're, if our state rep or our state senator are Lexington residents, they are members by virtue of their elected seats. And so we have a 198 member legislative body, which makes conducting our business interesting even when it's done in person. So if you could go on to the next slide. So one of the problems that we faced this year is that we closed our offices in the middle of March at the same exact time that we were supposed to hold our annual town meeting, which is when we adopt our annual budget. And our budget, our fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th. And so we had this conundrum that we didn't have a budget. At that time, the legislature had not taken any action to address local governments' ensuing fiscal year budgets. And so the first thing we did is we started having early discussions in the early part of March about holding a remote town meeting and doing it on this type of a platform, on Zoom or some other platform. And what we did first is we started talking to our town council, council as in our legal counsel, about whether or not there was already provisions in the law that would allow us to do this. And so our town council opined that there was a provision in the law because the law says that town meetings need to be held in one or more places within the community. What the legislature really meant about that was that if you had overflow, it could be handled in 2 different buildings or 2 different locations with some way of getting information back and forth to each other. When town meeting was created 350 to 400 years ago, there was no internet and certainly no Zoom meetings. And so they didn't really take that into consideration. And so then what ended up happening, so our town council said, yeah, I think it's a stretch, but I think we could say that this complies with the law. But unfortunately, we're also subject, because of debt authorizations and borrowing that goes through our legislative body, that our bond counsel also has to sign off on everything. And they're a little bit more conservative. And so they indicated that they didn't think that the statute was broad enough to include remote meetings being held online. One of the things we did then is we immediately had a meeting, discussion, and the select board that I work for, our town moderator who runs our town meeting, and all of my staff and our appropriation committee all got together, and we decided that we really supported the idea of doing a remote town meeting. And we were all committed to moving forward for our town meeting this year. So what we really needed to do is just to figure out exactly how we were going to do this. Go to the next slide. And so, there we go. Did we skip one? We just go, yeah.
I think that's the right one.
No, okay. And so the first thing we did is, once we realized that we needed to have a bill passed, our town council and our bond council worked together with bond councils and town councils from a couple of other communities within the greater Boston area, and drafted legislation which was introduced in the Senate on May 4th, passed in one day. And we thought we were going to be golden because our town meeting was scheduled on June 1st. And then the House got hold of it and started amending it and adding provisions in it for open town meeting. They started putting provisions in it that expanded public notice provisions so that 10 days before we could do X, the select board would have to have a public hearing. There had to be a formal request from the town moderator, and all of these other machinations that we had to follow. And so it sat at the House in a committee for quite some time, at the House Ways and Means Committee. And then all of a sudden, at the end of May, it started moving very quickly. And so the House passed the bill on May 26th. You can see from this slide, they took all kinds of actions again in one day. And what they did is they passed a bill that was different than what the Senate passed. And so it had to go back to the Senate, and then they fought over it for a while. And so in the ensuing time period, we started our town meeting on June 1st without any legislation authorizing it or confirming that it was valid and legal. And then on June 2nd, there was a bill that was passed. The governor signed it on June 6th, which was, well, we were clearly just finishing up. I think we finished on June 7th on our town meeting. And so we went through our entire town meeting, not really knowing whether or not the state legislature would have acted to ensure that what we were doing was legal. We go on to the next slide. So one of the things we did is, as we were working on our town meeting, we were also working with the legislature to put in some retroactive language into the bill, which they did. It was, I had to read it about 5 times to make sure that it said what we were being told it said, because it says, if this act does not take effect at least 15 days prior to the date of a scheduled representative town meeting to be held during the governor's March 10th, 2020 declaration of a state of emergency, blah, blah, blah. Not very clearly written, but that's something that happens a lot with the legislature. And so because we were a little bit concerned about whether or not the legislature would act in time, we also, because we have home rule authority here in Massachusetts by where we can request special legislation, we also had a town meeting article that would authorize the select board to petition the legislature for a special act that would confirm both the legality and the validity of any actions taken at our town meeting. And because we didn't even really trust that that was going to work, we also filed a motion for injunctive relief with Middlesex Superior Court, seeking to have the courts confirm the legality of our remote town meeting. And what we did is we also worked with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, who filed an amicus brief in support of our motion for injunctive relief. And the judge was actually willing to grant it. And so we felt pretty good about that, that even if the legislature didn't act, that the judicial branch would have confirmed the legality of our meeting. And then what happened is, because on May 26th, when one of the hearing dates were, the judge felt that because the legislature had acted, even though the two branches hadn't quite agreed, he decided he was going to hold off on making a decision and give the legislature a chance to deal with the issue. So we can go on to the next slide. So there's some technical stuff we had to do. For the video platform, we decided on using Zoom webinar with the 500 attendee option. It gave us the kind of controls we wanted to have to make sure that there were no Zoom bombers during the middle of our meeting. And it also gave us control over who was speaking and when they were speaking, and if they spoke too long, because there is a provision in our bylaws that only provides so much time for people to speak, that the moderator had the opportunity to shut somebody down. For the voting platform, we use the same exact system that we use when we do an in-person town meeting. It's called vVoter from Option Technologies. So that way it was very familiar with all 198 of our town meeting members. And then for the debate platform, one of our really talented select board members who's worked in the software industry and ran a center at MIT for a while, developed an online web portal that would provide a secure login. And it also provided a queuing function so that it was it felt very much like one of our regular town meetings, where there were speakers in support, speakers who would line up against, people who had a question or wanted to make a point of order. There were a lot of other technical issues that we had to deal with because people had different kinds of hardware, whether they had a Mac or a PC or they had an iPad. One guy did it on his iPhone. People use different browsers. And so there was a lot of touchy-feely stuff we had to do to make sure that it worked. You can go, oh wait, the thing is too, is that we had, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. Let's go to the next slide. And so then ramping up, it took a lot of work on the part of a lot of people to make it actually happen and happen so that there was public engagement as well as training for all of our town meeting members so that we weren't fidgeting through all kinds of training issues the night of the town meeting, because we realized that people would rather debate and vote on issues and not necessarily be trying to figure out, hey, how does Zoom work tonight? And so the select board, the town moderator, the town meeting member association president, and our town staff worked together to get information out and actually did a survey of what kind of hardware everybody had at home to make sure that people had the capacity to actually participate. We developed a dedicated remote town meeting website. All of our staff, where we normally do presentations in person live at the town meeting, we pre-recorded all of those videos and we had them available on the site for weeks before the actual town meeting. So the town meeting members could get online, they could like view my budget presentation, or we bought this little slice of land for to expand one of our municipal parking lots, that people could actually watch it online and understand it a little bit before the night of the town meeting. All of the things that we did were all closed captioning so that anybody with a hearing impairment would be able to also watch all of those videos. We held training sessions. My life in May was training for a remote online town meeting. We had a training session precinct by precinct every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night. All 9 precincts. We did one for the town staff, one for the select board, one for the appropriations committee. We had a makeup meeting, and then it all wound up on May 27th. We had a mock town meeting where we started it. We kind of ran through a couple of votes and wanted to make sure that everything ran smoothly. It was kind of funny because it really didn't, and it was, we fidgeted around a lot, but we got a lot of the things figured out that we really needed to. We cut out all of the pomp and circumstance that we normally have at town meeting. And it took a team of about 20 staffers behind the scenes to actually staff helplines, manage presentations, read questions from the public, because we wanted to be able to control that, to make this all happen. And it actually came out very, very smoothly. We can go to the next slide. And then the results, we called it the June first night jitters. We had 190 of our 198 town meeting members present, nobody in town. And we have a 96-year-old town meeting member who actually served on, he may be the last living person who served on JFK's cabinet, that lives in our community. And is a member of our town meeting, and he's been a town meeting member for about 50 years. He doesn't remember ever having 190 members. That's 96% of our town meeting. We typically have about 160 that attend our town meeting. So I think there was a lot of curiosity about the whole format. There was probably also something about being able to sit at home and have a glass of wine while you were doing your town meeting work. And so it was the biggest voter turnout that we had ever seen, which was great. We held our first ever online town meeting. As many people know, Lexington was the site of the first battle of the American Revolution, and it's something the community is very proud of. And so you've heard the shot heard around the world. Our town moderator kicked off the town meeting saying, "This is the Zoom meeting heard around the world." So we completed 27 articles that very first night. It included a large consent agenda. It included our budget, all of our general, our water department, our sewer, and our recreation funds. Our total capital plan, which is in the tens of millions of dollars. We had 2 home rule petitions. The CPA projects, which if you're outside of Massachusetts, that probably means Certified Public Accountant to most people. Here in Massachusetts, it means the Community Preservation Act, which is a surcharge that some communities have levied on their property taxes to set aside funds specifically for affordable housing, open space, and historic preservation. And Lexington was one of the first communities to adopt that, and we spend millions of dollars a year on it, so it's a very big part of our budget, as well as a land swap and a very large major zoning change that allowed for development of about a $250,000 office building with a 7-story parking garage. And so some very big things that typically would create a lot of debate. We had good, healthy debate, but we also moved pretty quickly on it. People were really patient, and really nobody more than our town moderator. I have this new fondness for her that, or appreciation that I just didn't have before, because some people, one of our town meeting members said, "Yeah, I think I've got a computer. I turned it on about 6 years ago." And so some people really struggled with the technology, but she was very good, as were our information technology staff, who were manning phones and actually went to one person's house to help them out. And so it took a lot of effort and hand-holding, but it worked really well. The great thing was that people seemed to have fun with it. They were teasing each other, making jokes. There's some laughter. It was a little bit more low-key, a lot like a lot of Zoom meetings. You get to see people's kids, their dogs. You hear lawnmowers, all kinds of things happen. And we think we probably had a great turnout, because I think people were really eager to see how this whole thing was going to work. And they also feel a real strong responsibility to ensure that town's business is able to be carried out. We were really the first town in Massachusetts to do this, and now there are a whole bunch of communities that are in the process of doing the same thing. And so with that, I'm happy to take questions during the Q&A.
Awesome, and I'll jump in a second here and do some of the online engagement presentation that we were hoping Avi would be able to do. But before I do that, I'm just kind of curious, Jim. I mean, you know, it was a lot of work. It seemed like it went very well. My question, I guess, is whether you know, once we return to a situation where face-to-face meetings are possible, you know, would you do this again? And would you do it, or are there things that you would want to kind of include from face-to-face, you know, meeting days, as well as things from that you've been able to do with this process? I mean, just curious about
Yeah,
how you would do this again.
So there is discussion right now in Massachusetts about the law that was passed specifically for us was just valid during the state of emergency that the governor declared. Once that state of emergency goes away, this goes away. But there's talk about taking the provisions that we did and actually expanding it and making it permanent. And some of the reasons why is that a lot of people who serve on town meetings are elderly, and a lot of people have kids, they have childcare issues. They can't necessarily dedicate going out a couple nights a week over the course of a month to go to a town meeting. And so it is a way to increase participation on a more broad spectrum. And so there is an interest in continuing this going forward. And I think it's something that the town would be interested in working with the state to pilot. And I think that we would even be interested in doing a hybrid, where some people were available at what we call Carey Hall, which is the building where we hold our town meeting, and then have some people that would be at home as well.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I mean, I ask partly because it does seem like we are at a kind of a unique moment where we can be, there is more flexibility. You know, people are getting exposed to different sorts of things, and it's kind of a time where we can rethink, you know, how we want engagement to happen. And we can go to the next slide. I mean, and obviously that includes, you know, some of the online tools and doing things by Zoom like you've done. And certainly there's other things we could do or introduce on the face-to-face side once that's possible as well. So let me just give a quick overview of some of these sorts of things. And I know people have experienced some of them, maybe not all of them. But I think one thing that's important to kind of do when you're thinking about virtual engagement is to kind of categorize it. What purposes do we have here? What goals do we have for engagement? And so this slide is an attempt to kind of to categorize them for you. And by the way, yes, several people have asked in the Q&A if we'll share the slides. We will definitely do that, and some other resources as well. But so you've got a number of tools for crowdsourcing and ideation. Give people a chance to kind of come up with ideas for solving a problem or introducing a new priority. And on the side, the right hand of the screen here, you've got just some representative platforms. We're not endorsing any one of these. These are just tools to look at to get a sense of what types, you know, for this type of purpose, here's some representative platforms you can look at. You can gather feedback on problems and services. And a lot of cities now have See, Click, Fix or things like that, which allow people to identify problem spots, you know, potholes, graffiti, things like that, and filter that information directly to the Department of Public Works. Crowdfunding, obviously you can be using platforms to kind of give people a chance not only to give some money for priorities in the community, but also to, in some cases, to do crowd resourcing, which is giving some of the volunteer time to doing supporting some of those causes. Petitions, certainly, change.org being the most famous one. Games, or what they call serious games, they're certainly a great way for people to kind of learn more about how their communities work, how how government works in ways that are entertaining as well as informative. Mapping and wikis, so various ways of helping people kind of map their environment, both the assets and also the problem spots in their communities. Illustrating vote options and voting on them are things that platforms like MetroQuest and SLO are very good at. So you can really kind of give people a much more informed sense of what the different options are on the table, what the pros and cons and costs of each are of each, and give them a chance to kind of say which one they like best. Hyperlocal community building is kind of a fancy name for the fact that these very small kind of neighborhood level kinds of online spaces. Nextdoor is the most famous one, but certainly all kinds of things, just including like regular old email listservs. They're all over the place now. Huge numbers of people now belong to those kinds of very local sorts of online communities. And when you look at what's happening on those, the kinds of things people are talking about, some of it is about, you know, what the city council or the school board just did. Some of it is about, you know, have you seen my lost cat? Or can somebody kind of recommend a good plumber? And so giving people engagement opportunities that kind of solve their daily life needs, as well as, you know, giving them a chance to have a voice on public questions is kind of important. That you know you've got something good when you've got that kind of an engagement asset for people. There are some platforms now for deliberative discussion, and then polling, things like Mentimeter, Poll Everywhere, things that give people a chance to answer questions online are also an important benefit. So if we go to the next slide, so one thing that we've used the public agenda a lot, just like you did, Jim, is we use Zoom a lot, and there's certainly other competitors to Zoom, WebEx and other things, Microsoft Teams, things like that. But you know, Zoom is one of the most common ones, and the breakout function in Zoom is something that people should consider if you haven't done that already. You can actually have, you know, 200 people take part in a Zoom meeting, and then you can randomly or not so randomly sort them into groups of 5, you know, for a 20-minute conversation or something like that. So you can, in fact, mimic some of the things you could do face-to-face in that kind of online environment. We also use Mentimeter, and again, there's lots of other polling pieces of polling software, but if you've got a combination of something like a Zoom meeting where people can participate and see pictures, see images, see the video of people, and you give them a chance to kind of weigh in on questions using something like Mentimeter, that's often a very good combination for people. If we go to the next slide, a really important thing to be asking about all kinds of engagement, certainly online engagement, is questions about access, equity, and inclusion. We just listed a few of them here, but certainly asking, how much is it going to cost people, both in terms of time and in money, to use this tool, use whatever engagement opportunity you're offering? How much bandwidth is required? I mean, Zoom actually takes a fair amount of bandwidth. So in places that are more rural, perhaps, or when people are not using desktops or not using broadband, they don't have broadband access, that's an important consideration. It may not be something that a wide variety of people in your community can participate in. Will people find it easy to use? I mean, there are things like Facebook and Facebook Live that people know well, and they're not intimidated by it, and they know how to use it. So those are more accessible to people. And other things may have other virtues, but they're not necessarily as easy to use. You might have to kind of build up to them. Where are people gathered online is an important question. I'm going to tackle that one in a second. And then also, how does what you're doing mesh with other things? I mean, in general, with online engagement and all kinds of engagement, there's usually no kind of magic bullet. There's no single tool that will solve all of the problems or do all the things that you want it to do. And so what you really need is a kind of a strategy that includes different sorts of online opportunities and face-to-face ones as well, to actually really do a good job over the long term of engagement. What couple things you want to do when you're kind of testing out various kinds of online opportunities is, first of all, kind of create user stories, which basically means putting yourself in the shoes of people you want to use this thing, think about how they're going to interact with it, and what challenges they might have or what benefits they might see, and then actually test the tools with people, find out, can people use this, what are the barriers you didn't foresee, and so on. We go to the next slide. This is a map. It's a funny map. If you ever get a chance to look at it more closely, you can when we send you the slides. And it's got fun things like Facebook has the northern wasteland of unread updates and the plains of awkwardly public family interactions. But basically what this map is doing is trying to kind of show you that people are gathered in different places online, just like they are in the face-to-face world. And so if you're thinking about engagement and you're thinking about, how do I bring people to what I'm trying to do, thinking about, where they are gathered, what kind of websites are they going to, what kinds of online communities are they part of, what purposes do they have for the internet, and going and getting them, as opposed to just always waiting for people to come to you. If you just wait for people to come to you, if you just announce something, you generally are not going to get as high a turnout, and you generally aren't going to get as representative a turnout. You won't get lower income people, you won't get a wide variety of people in your community. Next slide. Just a couple more resources, then we're going to go to the Q&A. We'll send you these after the webinar, but we've got one called Keeping People Connected, which is a free resource in Public Agenda, particularly at the neighborhood or town level, but it's something you could share with other people as they're trying to kind of strengthen and sustain engagement in their communities. And then the next one is something called, if you go to the next slide, there's one called Taking the Conversation Virtual, that is about facilitating online discussions in various kinds of platforms and formats. So let's go to the Q&A. One person said, and this is for Jim or Elisa, whoever wants to weigh in here, I'm finding that these remote engagements have yielded the most engagement ever in terms of sheer numbers. And that's also resonates with me. I've seen that as well. What are your thoughts on keeping these virtual meetings to make sure we reach everyone all the time? I think I just gave a few thoughts based on the slide I showed a second ago, but Lisa or Jim, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yes. and it's great hearing Jim's story about his legislature, because Terry and I were in meeting with our Indiana Association of Cities and Towns last week online. And there's going to be legislation proposed in January in Indiana to make online public engagement something expressly authorized.
And I would just add that it truly does work well. People are comfortable with it. And I think people who would not necessarily leave their house for a night meeting, because most municipal meetings are at nighttime, are willing to hop on to a Zoom call for an hour or so. Last night, I was on a call with the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington, our police chief, and our select board chair for a couple of hours, and had a very engaging conversation about our police department and what we're doing right now. And I don't know that that would have been the type of meeting that really would have been even possible in a normal public setting because there would be a lot of other people who would be attending something like that. It was more of a meeting specifically to engage a specific group in town, and it worked fantastically.
I think also we should be aware of the fact that this is an unusual moment in terms of not only people being more comfortable with online things, partly because they have no, they've got to do it that way, but also because, due to social distancing, people have a bit more free time right now. They're not driving their kids to, to baseball practice. They're not, doing other things. They're not leaving their house as much. And so you've got, opportunity to get their attention more. And so I think partly what we want to do collectively is to make the most of that and make sure we organize things like you've done in Lexington, organize things that people like, and so that they will do them again once they're offered again. Question, do you think that an argument can be made that remote access to meetings should be mandated to satisfy reasonable accommodations requirements under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act? Lisa, do you have a thought on that one?
Well, I think it's an interesting argument. It doesn't hurt to make the argument to support the broader legislation we need anyway. In terms of the case law, I'm not aware of anything already existing on the subject. And to the extent that most municipalities are using community access television already, I think there might be a defense against the claim, but that's as much as I know.
Okay.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is that the technology would need to be available too for the area that you live. As you had stated earlier, some areas of the country don't necessarily have the broadband access necessary for residents to do that. In our area, it's not a problem, but in other areas around the country, I know it is.
One thing also I know that some of our partners have encountered is that, there's certainly difficulties sometimes people with disabilities using some of these online tools. I think there was a problem with Zoom at one point with I think it was their screen reader or something like that. I think it may have been fixed by Zoom, but in any case, that it's not automatic, that online, actually makes it easier for people, all kinds of people to participate. A question here, any best practices for preventing Zoom bombing without requiring the public to register too far in advance or divulge too much personal information? Any thoughts on hybrid meetings where some are in the room and others are online? What can be done to make them successful? Jim, you had a Zoom bombing defense. You had to kind of deal with that, I think you said, in Lexington.
Yeah, we really did not want, because we've been holding all of our public meetings on Zoom as well. And so we do them all as a webinar so that the only people who are panelists, similar to what this format is, are the people who have been set up as panelists. Everybody else is an attendee. And that allows you some control over what people are saying and who's speaking and an ability to mute them. At least the host can do it. And so that's the way we've been doing it, and we just haven't had an issue.
Most places.
I think that these kind of hybrid meetings are certainly a good, and that's certainly the kind of thing that you can envision people, towns and cities doing on into the future. And I've seen that, even before the whole pandemic hit, I've seen meetings organized that way, where some of the people are, for some of the time they're looking at monitors and then they're breaking up and talking to each other, the people who are in the room talking to each other in smaller breakout groups, and people online then having their own online discussions in breakout groups. So that I think it's a little bit more of a degree of difficulty as far as, it's a bit more to manage, as far as the tech aspects of it and the in the room kind of facilitation of it. But generally, I've seen it work pretty well. And also another variation of that, people playing games, so you provided some kind of a smart game where they're kind of really used to playing the game to kind of understand better, environmental resilience in their neighborhood, or how the town budget works, or things like that. So they're spending some of the time kind of interacting or with the computer, playing the game, and sometimes that's also in groups. And then after they've done that, then they come back and they talk to each other face to face about what happened in the game, what did they learn, what was unrealistic or realistic about it, that sort of thing. So I think those kinds of formats are definitely, they have some of the best features of both, obviously, and something that I think a lot more experimentation is warranted. I saw in the chat someone, several towns in Miami and one county in Virginia have experimented with public comment via YouTube before COVID. And I think, I imagine that's using YouTube Live, which I haven't used, but I think it is something that you can, with both YouTube Live, I believe also Facebook Live, you can do it so that you're both streaming the video of the meeting and also giving people a chance to comment using, sometimes it's a plugin, one's called StreamYard, but giving people a chance to kind of participate that way. And there's the same person, they've done it live and with pre-recorded public comments. Excellent, thank you. We're getting to the end here. Any kind of thoughts from either of you, Lisa or Jim, about any advice you want to leave people with as they're kind of going forward and thinking about what they want to do, how they might want to take advantage of this moment? You know, it's a crisis which has lots of awful aspects to it. On the other hand, crises sometimes are where you can actually make the most movement and change on things that maybe needed to have changed beforehand. Any thoughts about how people should kind of seize the moment?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly what you just said, is that sometimes a crisis is an opportunity waiting to happen. And people are always willing to try new things during a crisis, and this was no exception. I think that prior to the whole remote environment that we are working and living in right now, that people would not have considered like a Zoom meeting being an okay way to hold a public meeting. Just like they wouldn't consider at the municipal level that it was appropriate for public employees to be working remotely. We're looking at some of our staff that may be able to continue working remotely in the future. We had talked about it before, but nobody was ever willing to sort of be the first community around that had employees that were working remotely. So again, it's a crisis that's created an opportunity, and it's something that we don't want to just go back to the old normal, but look at a new normal. And so I would certainly encourage people to try new things and try it out in little bits and drabs, and then figure out what works and implement those things long term.
And I would encourage people to organize within their states with the NGOs, the nonprofit organizations that are representing municipalities, representing public managers, city council, and city managers. It provides you with a platform that is generally a nonpartisan organization with a authoritative voice with the legislature. And Jim, just wondering, has that started to happen with your equivalent of the National League of Cities in Massachusetts?
It is. The Mass Municipal Association is our state municipal league, and they have been very active on this topic from the very beginning, highlighting the need for local government to be able to continue to operate. And so they have worked hand in hand with the legislature. And as you said, they're a nonpartisan organization that has the respect at the state capitol.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And we will indeed sending all of the people who signed up here, the link to the slides, link to the resources I mentioned earlier. I think I did not mention the other resource, that Making Participation Legal, the one that you talked about, Lisa, which includes the model ordinance that Lisa wrote, which is something that city councils and state legislatures can look at as far as a model to use when thinking about the legal framework for participation and how they might want to upgrade it. Thank you both for your experiences and your wisdom for this. It was terrific. And thanks everyone for participating with us today. Please do go ahead and keep sending us questions. The public agenda is what we're here for, is to take people's questions and provide resources. And in some cases, we were able to work with communities as well. So we look forward to hearing from you, and thank you both for participating, and thanks everyone. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.